Welcome back to the Georgia Tech Clean Energy Speaker Series. On behalf of my colleagues, I hope you had a great summer and are now ready to get back to a continuation of the Clean Energy Speaker Series. Excuse me, I ran up the steps. I'm Ben Hill. I'm with Georgia Tech's Technology Incubator Program, ATDC, and I'd like to welcome you to the continuation of the Clean Energy Speaker Series for this school year, 2010-2011. I trust on your way in, I trust you had the opportunity to look at or grab a copy of the Strategic Energy Institute's Southern Winds Report, which is right on the table outside. Maybe even look at the Georgia Tech spatial mapping demo, marine mapping demo, and also look at or get some information about the upcoming MIT Enterprise Forum on Smart Grid, which is in October. I'd like to thank the sponsors of this series, which making this valuable series possible. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Sutherland for their ongoing support, the Georgia Tech Enterprise Innovation Institute and ATDC for their sponsorship and support, the Southface Institute for helping disseminate and get the word out about the program. And then I'd also like to thank McKinsey & Company, our most recent sponsor of the series. Also, I'd like to recognize and express our appreciation to the program advisors for this series who are really kind of tapping into their Rolodexes and helping frame the topics and find great speakers to make this possible. Marilyn Brown, who's a professor of public policy, is an advisor. Valerie Thomas, professor in industrial and systems engineering and public policy, is an advisor. David Scholl, in biochemical engineering, is an advisor. Deepak Devan in College of Electrical and Computer Engineering, who's teaching a class at this time, is an advisor. Ken Ostrowski, director at McKinsey & Company, is an advisor. And Jay Hakes, who's head of the Carter Center and former administrator of the Energy Information Administration, is also an advisor. So I'd like to thank them for their ongoing support. What I'd like to do, and just briefly in a minute or two, is kind of give you a recap of where this series has come from and give you a roadmap as to where this series is going over the next few months. So if you were to think back to November 2009, this series began with two valuable presentations from analysts at the Energy Information Administration looking at power demand and liquid fuels demand in the Southeast for the next 20 years. So we fundamentally looked at the demand side of the equation. In January and onward, we've been looking at the supply side of the equation. In January, Marilyn Brown led a great panel discussion on energy efficiency in the Southeast. In February and March, Valerie Thomas led great discussions on biomass in the Southeast. In April and May, we had outstanding discussions on solar energy in the Southeast. Today, we're looking at wind energy and the viability of it as a resource in the Southeast. In October, we're looking at the role of coal in meeting future energy demands in the Southeast. In November, we'll be looking at carbon management strategies. And then in 2011, we'll look at the energy-water connection, power storage, smart grid, and energy data and information opportunities. So you can kind of see where the series has come from and where it's going over the next few months. For those of you participating over the web today, and we have quite a few, first I'd like to say thank you for hanging in there. Should you have questions for the panel, please email those questions to me. I have my BlackBerry and I'll get them. Please email those to me at ben.hill@gatech.edu, and I'll pass the questions along to the panel today. At this time, I'd like to introduce Marsha Ward for Sutherland, who is going to introduce our speakers. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Ben. Before I introduce the speakers, I just want to say how pleased Sutherland is to be a sponsor of this event. This is, I guess, the second iteration, and we're just glad it's been a successful time for everybody. We've all had some great speakers. It's been a good learning experience for everyone, and this type of clean energy is really very simpatico with part of Sutherland's practice. We're a full service law firm, but we have a very vibrant and growing renewable energy practice, and in particular there's some brochures on your way out, if you didn't get them on your way in, regarding our wind practice as well as other renewables. We've got two great speakers for you today, and unfortunately the third great speaker was not able to be here, Dr. Nick Rigas from Clemson. So we'll be missing his input, but we've certainly, the two speakers that we have are going to make up for that. Our first speaker will be Amir Mikhail. He's the Vice President, or Senior Vice President, excuse me, of Engineering at Clipper Windpower. Dr. Mikhail is responsible for the design of Clipper's 2.5 megawatt Liberty wind turbine, but I think he will be telling you a little bit more about a larger 10 megawatt wind turbine that Clipper is now currently working on. He's got a vast experience of engineering in the wind turbine and wind power area. He was president or vice president of engineering for Zond and Enron Wind Corporation from the late 1980s to 2000. And in those capacities, he led the engineering design of the Z-class 550 kilowatt to 1.5 megawatt wind turbines. So he's been in the industry from the get-go, and so has a vast wealth of experience. He has more than 30 publications in the wind power field and has been awarded 13 patents. And I'm sure Dr. Mikhail is proud of his Georgia Tech degree as a PhD in aerospace engineering. And our second speaker today, I'll just go ahead and introduce everyone so they can make their presentations in a smooth order, is Spencer Haynes. And Spencer is the Director of Commercial Policy at Duke Energy in North Carolina. He supports Duke Energy's commercial renewable energy business through state and federal policy and development work. And he's involved in Duke Energy's generation services 750 megawatts of wind assets. Spencer joined Duke in 2008 to help develop the company's regulated renewable energy strategy, which is in compliance with North Carolina's, and North Carolina is the only state in the southeast to actually implement a renewable energy standard, and of 12.5%, I believe. And so that's Duke Energy's part of compliance with that renewable portfolio standards law. Spencer's also has led development efforts for Duke Energy's coastal wind energy demonstration project. That's in the eastern Pamlico Sound in North Carolina, and after that he moved to the unregulated side of the house on the commercial business. And not to be outshone by Dr. Mikhail, Spencer also has a joint environmental policy and law degree from Vermont School and an MBA from Wake Forest.
Given that Nick Rigas is not here today, what we're going to do is begin the presentations with Spencer speaking to Nick's slides.
Yes. I'm going to do I'm not the first speaker, I'm the third, but I'm going to stand in for Nick. And I had a chance to look through his slides, and I think they lay a pretty good foundation for the talk we'll give here in just a minute. So I want to sort of ground everyone on where we are in the United States with wind in 2010. This is a look at the renewable portfolio standards in the United States. There are 31 renewable portfolio standards, including the District of Columbia, and they vary in their composition and targets and timelines, but the reality is they're driving demand for renewable energy projects throughout the country, and they are a large reason why we have a renewable energy industry in the United States today. And sort of by inference, you could also say there's this white area in the southeast is missing a lot of these standards, and we can talk a little bit more about the economic reasons why that's happened, the policy implications, et cetera, but only one state, North Carolina, has gone ahead and created a renewable portfolio standard, and that really has created a solar industry in the state of North Carolina, and it's created the demand for the product. Wind projects historically have been in the Midwest and the western part of the state. That's really predominantly because there's a vast wind resource east of the Rockies and throughout the Midwest. This is a chart that Nick put together that shows where that distribution of wind projects are through megawatt capacity. About 1.8% of total electricity comes from wind. That was as of 2009. 10,000 megawatts were added to the grid in 2009. That was the largest year in US history. And that represented about 39% of all new generation that was added to the grid. So that's including coal, natural gas, and all of the generation options. It was 39% of new generation. And about 14 states have over 1,000 megawatts of wind in the United States to date. So this slide shows large electrical demand. So large electrical demand is really required to create the demand for renewable energy projects. This is just a relative comparison of that load. I think maybe we'll talk a little bit. I know I have a slide in my presentation that talks a little bit about the reason for, this really helps bring projects into the areas that really need the demand. So point out the Atlantic coast is a significant portion of the total demand in the United States. And then Midwest interconnection queues requests have really outpaced demand. So there is a backlog of interconnection requests throughout the Midwest. And you can see the states where that's the case. Wind is being built out so quickly that one of the limiting factors now is the ability to connect to the grid, the ability to bring that power to market, which we generally call congestion. And this is just sort of an example of how much activity there is in the Midwest, and there's not enough, there's a limiting ability to get that power to market. Again, congestion increases costs. This is a chart that goes through that. And land-based resources currently are limited to the mountains. So I think you have Georgia here and South Carolina and North Carolina. And the darker pink colors are the higher class of wind. And you typically find them on ridgetops in the mountains. So the lighter colors are a lower wind resource. So as a developer and generally a society, you want to put technology where it's going to work and where it's going to operate efficiently, and that's generally on ridgetops. It's actually, so this is a look at those ridgetops. it's quite a bit of wind, but there are challenges. I can speak to them in North Carolina. Right now we have a law that actually bans wind turbines being built above a certain elevation. And so wind in the mountains in North Carolina isn't even a possibility just because of state law. The offshore wind resource is pretty vast in the United States. This is a chart of the West Coast, the Great Lakes, and the East Coast. And what you can see is that the darker red colors are the higher potential areas, stronger class winds for wind in the United States. That red color corresponds to a higher capacity factor than the yellow and the orange and the purple shades that you see in the Midwest. So you can sort of get a relative comparison for what's going on here. Yes, we have a tremendous wind resource in the Midwest and east of the Rockies, but likewise we have these hot spots off the Atlantic and the West Coast where offshore wind could really be deployed at scale and could eventually come down and be cost competitive, provide a renewable energy solution. I mentioned electrical demand. 78% of total electrical demand in the United States derives from those East Coast states. So that's huge. When you think about bringing that power to market, they have the demand and the hunger for that electricity. So that, when I'm looking at projects, that tends to say that would be a good spot to build a project and bring that power in. This is another look at shallow waters off the coast. The green map shows electrical demand relative to electricity use. So there's 200%. South Carolina has 200% of its electrical need just in the offshore wind resource. North Carolina has something like 300%. Virginia is 170-some percent. These are relative comparisons just to give you a sense for the scale of that resource off the coast, and then not to leave Georgia out there too. This is a closer look at a recent report the Department of Energy put out on wind resource assessment in the offshore space. They looked at all 50 states. I commend the report to you. It's on DOE's website. I think if you just search for National Renewable Energy Lab, you can, and offshore, you can get to this report. It came out in June, I believe. And this is a closer look at what the offshore wind potential is. And it is something like 4,100 gigawatts. And just to put that number in perspective, our total electrical capacity in the United States is about 1,000 gigawatts. So this is potentially 4,000, it's potentially 4 times more than what we currently have. Now, no one's suggesting that we're going to build out, 4,000 gigawatts of wind or even offshore wind at that. But the point is that even a small percentage of that resource could provide a tremendous amount of renewable energy. I think we're going to get into these a little bit later, so I'm going to skip through that. These are the raw numbers in megawatts. So 95,000 megawatts in North Carolina, in greater than 3 nautical miles. Less than 3 nautical miles, you have 35 gigawatts. Georgia has 28 gigawatts in state coastal waters within 3 miles, and 400 megawatts in the offshore space. South Carolina, 31 gigawatts in the state jurisdictional water, and then another 3 gigawatts or so in the deeper waters, federal waters. And this is just looking at wind speed. So when you're looking to develop projects, you want to obviously find the greatest wind resource possible. So this just takes a fraction of the wind resource that DOE looked at, the acreage that's above 8 meters per second, which is generally a pretty good wind resource. A lot of renewables advocates have pointed out there are job benefits to building wind projects. I think there are 85,000 jobs in the United States right now directly related to the wind industry. There's also water savings, and I think the blue map goes through the amount of water savings from that. And this is Southern Winds, Georgia Tech, the Southern Company commissioned the Southern Winds report 3 years ago, I believe, and really set everyone's sights on offshore wind in the Southeast. So everyone who worked on that report deserves a lot of credit for raising everyone's sights to look at offshore wind. Europe has been doing this for 20 years. We have this great resource off the coast. Why don't we look at it? And I think this was really one of the first very serious efforts to take a look at that resource and figure out what it would take to develop it. So, and then there's another project that I know Nick was going to tell you about, which is the Palmetto wind study. I won't do it justice, but what they have done is they have deployed a buoy off the coast of North Charleston. They're collecting wave data and wind speed data just right at the wind, right at the water's level. You need that type of information when you're designing foundations. Not only the type of foundation, but how stiff it needs to be, how it's going to interact with the tower. And it's a critical piece of information you need if you're going to build an offshore wind project. I believe they're also looking at deploying a Met tower with Santee Cooper. Clemson is leading the charge, but I know there are lots of folks who've been working on this, so I want to mention that in Nick's absence. Maybe Nick's listening to us online, actually. So. And I'll mention this briefly. The Coastal Wind Project was a demonstration project that Duke Energy Carolinas undertook about 1.5 years ago. The utility looked at deploying up to 3 turbines. They were responding to a state law that allowed for full cost recovery of the project. But my understanding is the further they got into the project, the higher the costs became. The smaller the benefit was to what that cost was. And I think the public estimates of what the cost was going to be was over $120 million just for 3 turbines. And at that point, I think everyone had to really figure out if this was going to be a benefit or not. And the utility decided to cancel the project. I believe it was August 20th. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the lessons learned when we get to my presentation. Cost of energy is still not competitive. On land-based costs, you have about $2 million a megawatt, and that leads to about $50 per megawatt hour in terms of a PPA. That's actually pretty competitive with traditional power generation today. There are some challenges going on out there for onshore wind that have to do with the recession, have to do with the utilities not needing as much renewable energy right now. And I know lots of developers are working pretty hard to try and get projects in the ground for this year. These are some of the key drivers Nick identified: policy uncertainty, regulatory requirements, experience and critical mass, the development of the supply chain, reducing the cost of energy delivered. The Department of Energy just put out their strategic plan for decreasing the cost of offshore wind over the next decade. I actually think it's being finalized right now, so it should be out in the coming weeks. I think they may even be releasing it at the American Wind Energy Offshore Conference in Atlantic City in a week. But right now, cost of offshore wind is pegged at $130 to $200 a megawatt hour. That's 13 to 20 cents. And I would say maybe it's even a little bit more than that because we don't know all the challenges of actually building these projects. But there are lots of opportunity to bring those costs down over time, and Nick identified a few of them here. I know Nick, I probably shouldn't do this, but I know Nick is really excited about the Clemson University wind turbine testing facility. I believe it's a 10 megawatt drivetrain facility that's being built in North Charleston, South Carolina. Its primary mission, high value, high quality, cost competitive testing services. This will be the largest drivetrain testing facility in the world. It holds the potential for developing the next generation of offshore wind turbines, turbines that potentially don't have gearboxes, that are direct drive, that are a lot lighter by consequence, and that can be manufactured at a lower cost. And then they're also looking to partner with industry and probably turbine manufacturers to figure out how to drive those costs down. Southeast is active in the wind industry. I know that these dots in the Southeast actually represent components. There are about 6,000 components in each wind turbine. So the facilities I know about are component manufacturers in North Carolina, and there are likewise some throughout the rest of the Southeast as well. So this is Nick's summary. I'm not going to, well, I guess I'll let you all read it, and I'm going to let Dr. Mikhail come up and lead our discussion in the technology, and then I'll be back up. Thanks.
Can you hear me better now? It's always exciting for me to come back to Georgia Tech here because I spent the best time of my life here going to Georgia Tech. Unfortunately, I was competing with Dr. Sanker, so it was very hard to do. So, but I finally graduated anyway. So it was. It's always. You know, I spent most of my life working in renewable energy, especially in wind, and I'm going to be biased towards convincing you that wind is a very good thing for Georgia and for the Southeast. So that will show in my presentation a little bit. But I would like to bring you with me to this conclusion rather than just be a sentiment. So I think a lot of the information that I'll be sharing with you are going to be already have been covered by some of Nick's work, and so I'm going to go through some of this work a little faster. I would like to tell you a little bit more outside what's happening in the Southeast. I'd like to tell you what's happening in Europe. And as you can see here, this is the wind resource for land-based turbines and offshore turbines off of the European continent, including the UK. The two countries that have shown tremendous interest in offshore wind is the UK, which intends to put up to about 40 gigawatts of wind resources offshore in the UK. And Germany is now committed to about 25 gigawatts of wind. And there are some activities going on now in China and places like this. But as you can see, there are two aspects of offshore wind. One is that the wind resource is always higher because of the smoothness of the boundary layer. So you get a lot more acceleration of wind on the water. And you have less variability. Normally the wind is more consistent. So you get high capacity factors. It's like on a land-based machine, a capacity factor is normally in the 25–30%. On an offshore wind site is upward of 40, and some of them up to 50. So it's a much better resource. The area where most of the activities in Europe is occurring is in the Baltic and on the North Sea. And you can see from this map here, red is the best resource that there's very, very strong resource, especially in the northern part of the North Sea, off of the coast of England. That's why England is really betting on wind offshore. And they are putting all their resources into actually making sure that wind is going to contribute a major portion of their electricity demand. I think Nick has and Spencer have covered a lot about the potential of wind resource in Georgia, and you can see this is also a report from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory that has been reviewed. Mary tells me has been reviewed by other people, and this shows what kind of resources in Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. I'm not going to dwell on that, but the surprising part is that Georgia, who people thought has very limited land-based resource, has a very adequate, actually, offshore wind resource, winds above 7.5 meters per second, which is considered economical. So there is a potential for offshore wind in Georgia. I think this, Nick has covered this, where we are looking at the total offshore wind resource in the United States. The advantage of offshore, which has been covered earlier, is that its proximity to load centers. So you don't have to, the wind resource is mostly in the middle of the country, which is that corridor expanding from North Dakota all the way to Texas. That's where most of the land-based wind is. So the idea is to actually exploit that resource. You would have to transmit all that power all the way to the East Coast and to the West Coast. That's where most people live. So the offshore does not have that added expense of transmitting all that power from the middle of the country to the end of the country. So there is a tremendous advantage of cultivating offshore because that's where the load is. The other part is there's plenty of it. The offshore resource is tremendous. As mentioned before, it's 4 times the potential of offshore wind in the United States is 4 times the current electric demand. So we have about 1,000 gigawatts of electric demand, and there's 4,000 gigawatts of offshore potential. The other advantage that the East Coast has is the fact that the bathymetry of the East Coast is much more suitable for offshore wind. So you don't get this huge drop of the continental shelf that we get on the West Coast. As you can see that the West Coast, you go, you know, a few hundred feet off of the coast, you are 300 feet of water right away. But you can see from the bathymetry here that the continental shelf extends considerably beyond the land borders of the East Coast. That makes it that you can go farther offshore where people can see the turbines without having to go to 30 meter, 40 meters deep water. And the depth of the water pretty much tells you what the cost of the turbine is going to be, because the balance of plant, and I'm going to cover a little bit of that later on, the balance of plant is what determines the cost of the turbine. So the deeper the water, the more cost associated with the installation and erection. Again, I think that Nick and Spencer have mentioned that most states have 3 nautical miles that are within the jurisdictions of the state, and except for Florida and Texas, there are 9 miles. I don't know why that is the difference, but it's a different country, I think. So we have different applications here. I think Nick and also has covered some of this, where we're talking about the wind resource in Georgia and the potential of the resource in Georgia here, and you can see that the northwest side of Georgia offshore is a pretty good wind resource. So, you know, I think that's the surprising part that came out of these studies, is that Georgia had that good wind potential. So where's the actual wind projects that are happening? Is that really happening, or just people talking about it? So I thought I'd just give you a little bit of a global view of what's happening worldwide. And look at this here. These are projects that are actually in place right now, off of the shores of the UK, off of the shores of Holland, off of the shores of Germany. That reminds me with wind in the 80s or 90s when, we were talking about 1 gigawatts, 2 gigawatts. This is the offshore wind resource exactly as the land-based wind resource was in the 80s and 90s. You've got a gigawatt, 2 gigawatt, and all of a sudden we have 35 gigawatts of wind installed in the United States now. So this is the ramp up that's going on worldwide, and it's happening in Europe because there's a stable policy. And we were talking at breakfast with Ben about this, that there's a very strong support for renewable resources and for renewable companies in Europe and China. And even though we invented wind in the United States, the first wind farms were actually built in California. But now our people are committing their resources and their capabilities into utilizing wind for their energy needs. So, we are at 35 gigawatts, the Germany at about 25, 26, and China is catching up with Germany. And I think people are predicting within a couple of years, China will be about the largest utilizer of wind turbines in the world, land-based and offshore. But offshore is really going, there's a tremendous amount of activities going on in Europe because there is a higher density of population, and most of the good wind resources have been taken land-based wise. So that's very much, they have no other option but to go offshore if they want to continue to expand the use of wind in Europe. Here is the commitment of different countries to their offshore potential. And you can see here the offshore wind market forecast for the UK. Going from 2009 to 2010, 2011 and 12, you see how the ramp up is happening there. There are projects that are permitted in the UK for 32 gigawatts right now on the books. That means people are committed to developing 32,000 megawatts of wind projects in the UK. And Germany, people are committed to developing 25 gigawatts of wind projects. So for the net capacity results by 2020, the UK is committed to 40 gigawatts of wind, and Germany is committed to 25 gigawatts of wind. And the part of the slide that you can't read over there on the right, that is the part that kind of defines all the different projects that are going on right now. So since Nick and Spencer have done a pretty good job on the resource, I'm not going to dwell on that, but let's talk about cost of energy a little bit, because that's a technology-related issue. One of the characteristics of wind, offshore wind, is that there's something happens in offshore that flips the cost of energy structure. As you can see over here, the turbine is about 33% of the cost of a wind plant. Then you look at the support structure, the grid, the O&M, and the decommissioning, all that is another 67%. So the cost of the turbine itself is a third, and the balance of plant is 2/3. That flips on land-based machines. On land-based machines, the cost of the turbine is 2/3 of the project installed cost, and the balance of plant is a third. So what happens, that is what is the driver for, we're talking about trying to reduce the cost of offshore wind. The way to reduce the cost of offshore wind is to go to larger turbines. Can you hear me all right? Okay. So, so that's what we're talking about here, is that there's a different structure for the economics of offshore wind. Most people, when they calculate offshore wind, potential or any kind of energy project potential, they use a levelized cost of energy equation, which assumes a certain discount rate. So if you assume a discount rate of 10% and you calculate the levelized cost of energy, which divides the total lifetime expenses of the machine by the total expected output. Now, when we can't calculate a gas turbine cost now based on the current gas turbine price, because current gas turbine price is $4 a megawatt hour, an MCF. But what you have to do is you have to estimate what the balance of plant, what do you expect that gas prices will be over the next 20 years, and discount that to the current year. And that's how you calculate cost of energy. So that's why I'm submitting this to you to show you what the impact of different things on the cost of energy for offshore machine. So here is a public domain document that I was able to find that tells us what are the different costs of projects that are already operational. These are projects are mostly in Europe that are already in operational, and they have a levelized cost of energy number, assuming a 10% discount rate of $180 per megawatt hour. So that is translating to 18 cents a kilowatt hour. So we agree that that's high. I mean, it needs to come down. But those are the brave pioneers that put these projects first. And number one, the incentives that are put in place in Europe can cover that cost and more. Because in the UK, you get the price of grey power, which is 50 pounds a megawatt hour, and you got 2 ROCs, or renewable obligation certificates. These 2 ROCs are in the order of another 100 pounds, so people get somewhere around $200 to $220 a megawatt hour. So these projects, based on the incentives available in the UK, are still profitable. However, you have to get that kind of experience in order to bring the cost of energy down. So the challenge to the industry now is to try to bring that cost of energy down. So that's what we're doing at Clipper right now, is we're trying to find out how do we bring, as I mentioned, that incentive is what drove us to take. This is the Liberty on the right-hand side. This is a machine which we have about 500 of them that are operational in the field. And you can see the difference in size between the Liberty and what we are contemplating to build right now, which is the 10 megawatt Britannia machine, or what we call the next generation turbine, or the MBE, or the million barrel of oil equivalent machine. And you can see the difference, its diameter. The swept area here is 100 meter. The swept area here is 150 meter. Why did we choose 10 megawatt? Not to make it easy for people to calculate the number of machines they need. I don't think so. I think we chose that size because we felt that this is the right size for the turbine to be able to take advantage of the economies of scale without increasing the risk of development, where there would be so much unknown in the development by going to a much larger scale. So we are using a lot of the technological basis that were developed under the Liberty and moving it into Britannia with some more innovation. I'd like to speak to you more about how does the cost go as the cube of the diameter, and the energy goes as a square diameter. So sometimes like going larger means more expensive, but then more innovations, to bring more innovations into the technology, that's what brings the cost of energy down. Here's a comparison between the MBE and a current 5 megawatt machine, and you can see how compact that machine is compared to some of these machines that are already being installed in the field. That's a 5 megawatt, that's a 10 megawatt. That's 126 meter in diameter, that's 150 meter in diameter. And we can only do that through innovations. And I don't think I have enough time to talk about all the innovations that we brought into the technology, but I'll be glad to to speak with you individually afterwards. So what are the challenges? I think the main challenge for offshore is to bring the cost of energy down. We need to bring the cost of energy down. Other challenges are the installation. You see how difficult it is to move a full turbine assembled like that. That's the Beatrice project off of the coast of England also, Scotland, I believe. And the machine was completely assembled on land. And you see the picture in the middle here. The whole machine was installed on its foundation, carried over together, fully assembled and put in there. So that's quite expensive. You can't do that very often. So people are looking about foundations and things that can be floated to the site, and then you put the turbine on land, and then you float the whole foundation with the turbine in before it gets installed on its foundation. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit on offshore machines that will bring the cost of offshore machines further down. These are all the different things that are challenging in offshore technology. As you can see, environmental issues, wave loading, turbine dynamics, foundations, these are all things that are required for offshore machine development that are not faced in land-based development. For the land-based, I think you are familiar with the 20% by 2030 report. That's a National Renewable Energy report. No, actually, it's a DOE report that was approved by the Office of Management and Budget. So it's been approved by the Department of Energy. And it says that it's very possible to produce 20% of our electric demand by the year 2030. And you can see that Georgia here has a land potential of somewhere around 1 gigawatt. South Carolina around 5 gigawatts, and North Carolina about 10 gigawatt. And I want to leave you with this final cost of energy comparison between different resources. And here, this is an International Energy Agency report. So it's not written by wind industry or fossil fuel industry. It's an international agency that compares different generation technologies with wind. And you can see here that they put all the different caveats that are not currently utilized when you compare cost of energy numbers. So if you compare it with pulverized coal, for example, you don't have the emission, the carbon emissions involved, and as we speak now, there's no carbon penalty. But people think that there might be at one point in time some carbon penalty. We don't know what that is or what happens or when it will happen. But they actually put all these together. It says if it happens, it would be about that amount. So you can see that the wind resource here, which is the onshore wind, is in the order of 70 cents, which puts it at on par or even lower than most fossil fuels if you put the carbon cost and O&M cost and investment cost in there. And the only resource that would be lower than land-based resource would be the geothermal resource. And then the offshore is now currently showing it in the $150 per megawatt hour range. We've shown some of the projects that were in 180, 170. So offshore is still more expensive, but we said it has the potential of lower cost of transmission. So that's the advantage of offshore. But I think the industry has a challenge, and the lawmakers have a challenge, the utilities have a challenge. We all need to work together to bring the cost down by bringing stability into the marketplace and giving us the potential to continue to innovate and to continue to bring the cost of energy down. I think, thank you very much for your attention.
And we'll have questions afterwards. So,
All right, so I'm going to move through some of the slides that you'll see that look a little duplicative, but bear with me here. Tell you a little bit about Duke Energy. I didn't have a chance to tell you about some of the things we're working on. At the end of this year, Duke Energy will have just about 1,000 megawatts of onshore wind spinning. We'll move, this is a new business for us. In 2007, we moved into that sector, and we, at the end of this year, will be a top 10 wind generator in the United States. We're very proud of that. We have brought our utility, our engineering and discipline that comes from being a utility and having a 100-year legacy, and we've brought that to wind, and it's been very successful for us. We also have a solar business. And then we have our traditional generation assets as well. Duke Energy is split into, I like to sort of call it, it's two entities. We have the regulated utility, which most people think of, and that's about 35,000 megawatts of generation. We've got our coal plants, our gas plants, our nuclear facilities, hydro, pumped storage, combined cycle, simple cycle plants. And that's the utility side. That's where I started at Duke. And about 6 months ago, I moved over onto our non-regulated business. And we are developing our renewable energy business. It's wind, it's solar. We have a joint venture with Areva to look at developing biomass plants. And we also have a subsidiary in Latin America and Central America, where we have a number of generation assets there as well. And then we have some traditional fossil generation assets in the Midwest. So that's sort of the story of Duke Energy. Our CEO, Jim Rogers, has been out in front of a lot of energy and climate issues. He's been a big supporter of cap and trade, still is. And we have viewed that as really the most efficient market mechanism for moving forward to address climate challenges. The question is the answer blowing in the wind? And my answer for today, which I'll sort of challenge you with, is yes, and it's offshore. Why offshore? What's the potential for offshore in the Southeast? We've heard a little bit about that from Amir. And then what are the development challenges for offshore wind? And if we have some time, I have some slides of just some pictures of the actual hardware and the turbines and the towers and erection and that sort of thing. So we'll try and get to that at the end as well. The benefits of offshore wind we've really covered, but one, it's a scalable resource, as we saw, upwards of 4 times the generating capacity in the United States could potentially be developed. Amir mentioned the 2030 report that the Department of Energy put out. That estimates we'll build 300 gigawatts of total wind, and about 50 of that is from the offshore wind resource. We can't get to that 20% without about 50 gigawatts of offshore wind. So it's an important, scalable, abundant resource for us. And in the Southeast, we happen to have a significant resource there. It's a clean, renewable energy resource. For every gigawatt of capacity, it produces about 3.2 million carbon-free megawatt hours of electricity, and you are displacing a certain amount of carbon emissions, water, and gas. Likewise, I think particularly in the Northeast, which the Northeast has a little bit of a lead on the Southeast, it's particularly because they see this as an economic development tool, a way to create jobs and grow the economy in a time where jobs are really hard to come by. I would suggest, and some others have suggested as well in the industry, that there will probably be a few hubs that get created on the East Coast, and there probably won't be 5 or 6. There probably will be a couple. And so it's important, and I think states in, New Jersey, for example, is moving ahead very quickly so that they can capture that space. And then likewise, we're here at Georgia Tech. I've worked pretty closely with the University of North Carolina, and the R&D opportunities for universities, for engineering schools, et cetera, are huge, and there's a great opportunity for collaboration. We have really covered this, so I'm gonna move past this slide. and just get to, and I may actually move through these as well, but Georgia has about 1% of the US total offshore wind capacity, something like 60 gigawatts if you developed it all. That's looking at total capacity. That's not looking at what is feasibly possible. But just to give you a sense for the size of that, Virginia is about 2%, 90 gigawatts if you were to develop all of it. And North Carolina, 7% of the US total, and South Carolina about half of that. Altogether, that's about 14% of total US offshore wind resources, which is, I think, pretty significant. Now, how much of the resource can feasibly be built? Now, this is a different question, and I want to use the University of North Carolina study as an example of a way to do a feasibility study that really helps policymakers and utilities and developers figure out what is really truly the potential for developing offshore wind. The University of North Carolina was asked by the General Assembly to conduct a 9-month study of offshore wind resources. And they looked at, first of all, they took the wind resource, and then they layered in the military flyways, the shipping zones, the sensitive environmental areas. They actually figured out where all the shipwrecks were off the coast of North Carolina, and they flagged those. You don't want to be putting a turbine foundation out next to a shipwreck. They looked at other cultural resources. They looked at areas where there's recreation, commercial fishing, water depths, transmission access, and also the economics sort of tied with all of that. The conclusion was that about 500 megawatts exist in state waters within Pamlico Sound, and that beyond Pamlico Sound, about 55 gigawatts exist off the coast. So that 55 gigawatt number is potentially it's actually the total amount that we need for offshore wind to achieve our 20% target, the DOE target, by 2020. So, or 2030, excuse me. I'm not saying all of that would be developed, but that gives you a sense for the scale of what we're talking about. And from the numbers Amir showed everyone, that is not out of the ballpark compared to what the UK is doing and Germany is doing. And the question is, shouldn't we be thinking big about this resource? This is a map of the feasibility study. The little red squares are the the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management lease blocks. They're in federal jurisdictional waters, which is beyond 3 miles. The color-coded here is different from the color coding on some of the other maps. Yellow is 30 to 35% capacity factor. Light green is 35 to 40%, and the dark green resource way off the coast is 40% capacity factor and higher. The circles are areas around some of our military bases. There could be radar there. You certainly wouldn't want to have any radar interference. We have some bombing ranges that ruled out some areas along the coast, shipwrecks, et cetera. So you can see all of the different layers that they did in this mapping exercise. And this is the punchline. A little bit in Pamlico Sound, and the vast majority is off of Raleigh and Onslow Bay, where you see that dark green resource. I want to touch on this briefly. The Duke Energy Carolinas utility had worked on a demonstration project to try and move offshore wind forward in the United States, and worked on it for about 1.5 years, and had done a lot of great work on this. And at the end of the day, they came up with a number that I mentioned earlier was very high. I think it was something on the order of $120 million for 3 turbines. And this was going to be upwards of $10,000 kW. And the conclusion by the management was that, and also the legislators and University of North Carolina, who had worked really hand in glove with the company, was that the benefits really, the cost really outweighed the benefits, and they couldn't move forward with it. This is a list of some of the things that they received from the General Assembly, and the lessons learned really are that scale matters. Demonstration projects in this location were very costly. Technology supports commercial scale development. We learned a lot about making sure you do all the things you normally do on onshore wind projects, which is community outreach, making sure your environmental impacts are documented and you can adjust your project accordingly to minimize those. And we also collaborated with universities as well as state and federal agencies, and we brought them in early in the process, and they were a big help because they were brought in early and they were really engaged. And finally, really state leadership matters. So we had a state senator who offered the utility full cost recovery for this project if we could move forward. And that type of leadership took a lot of the concerns about costs out of the challenge category for the utility. Some of the barriers Amir touched on, relatively high cost of electricity. There has to be, I mean, in my view, an RPS, a renewable portfolio standard, is almost a requirement in order to sort of change the dynamics for a utility to make this kind of investment. And I want to spend a couple minutes on that since we have a few minutes, but the utilities really have a least cost planning mandate through their integrated resource planning mechanism. And and that is a least cost planning mechanism. And right now, Amir showed, a lot of that is fossil fuels. Now some of it is onshore wind. Onshore wind is getting very competitive with those traditional resources, but offshore wind, as you saw, was much more expensive than those resources. In order to really change the dynamic, an RPS has to be created, and actually New Jersey created an offshore wind carve-out, which is what a lot of states have done to promote solar development, where they've said, thou shalt build 500 megawatts of solar, or 2% of the utility's load served. And those types of regulations really change the game for developers and allow for relatively more expensive renewable energy resources to be developed. Scale is also required to reduce the cost of electricity. The little chart on the right there is from the DOE's strategic plan for offshore wind. There you see the 54 gigawatts. Their estimate is that that cost needs to come down to 7 to 9 cents by 2030, or 13 cents by 2020, in order for offshore wind to really be deployed at scale in the United States. Public and environmental acceptance continues to be a challenge. The grass on the right is what we call submerged aquatic vegetation, and in coastal areas, this is a species of concern that you want to make sure you avoid as much as possible. We were able to actually avoid that in Pamlico Sound, but there are dozens of examples of federal and state environmental laws where you need to really make sure you're minimizing impact on these projects. And the third barrier, untested federal and state permitting regime. We haven't talked a whole lot about the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management today, but they have really had their hands full with the Gulf of Mexico, Deep Horizon disaster, and it has in some ways really slowed things down for offshore wind. It has the potential to catapult things forward, but I think time really will tell to see if that happens or not. So leadership is really required, and if the Southeast is interested in taking a leadership role in offshore wind, these are some of the things that can be done. Create sustainable demand. New Jersey's done this with a carve-out of 1,100 megawatts of offshore wind. They have a 3,000 megawatt target in their energy master plan. They actually have also created a $100 million tax credit and they have a public benefits fund. So they have a number of incentives that they can lure turbine manufacturers up there, et cetera, to create potentially one of these hubs on the East Coast. They've done a lot of things right. RFPs are another way to create sustainable demand. These are just a few states that have issued RFPs or utilities in the case of NIPA. And it's really about economic development and opportunities to attract industry. So those are a couple of things that can do. Although it is very challenging to make the argument to states that they need to spend more money when our school budgets are under attack, and it's a really, really tough time right now. Another thing that states can do, the Southern Wind Study did this as well, which is feasibility studies. North Carolina's done it, Rhode Island's done it, South Carolina is starting to do it, Georgia has done it. Baseline environmental studies is another thing that can be done. Looking at broad areas and figuring out where the species of concern are and where you need to just wholesale avoid developing these projects. And finally, data and science. You need the environmental data for both the engineering to address load and design parameters when we're building in areas where we do have tropical storms coming through. Regional co-opetition, this is a term maybe I got in business school, I'm not even sure it's a word, but it's sort of the combination of competing and cooperating, and I think the states that figure out how to do that are going to be most successful, and I just leave that with everyone to think about. So this is the question, and my answer is, the answer is offshore. I think we're happy to answer any questions. Looks like we have a little bit of time.
Would you like to sit in the captain's chair?
Sure.
We'll pass the microphone around.
Sure.
Or do you want to?
I just have some slides on, I'll just do this really quickly, but this is a look at a couple of different foundation types, a monopile and a gravity-based foundation, and then those are actually just sort of mock-ups, and then you actually have a picture of a real one. Here you can get a sense for the scale. These are very large facilities. The steel the steel that is made from this is actually 3.5 to 4 inches thick. One of our executives went over to Rostock, Germany, and came back and told me about how they cold roll steel plates into a semicircle. And I just imagine the force that is required to cold roll steel that's 3.5, 4 inches thick into a semicircle. It's pretty remarkable. The logistics that are involved in offshore wind. This is the foundation, the monopile being floated out to the site. The ship in the background is a jackup barge, and the cranes on those will lift the monopile up into place. And then an anvil comes in on top of that, usually 100-ton anvil, and will jam the monopile foundation down into the ground. And typically about 2/3 of the foundation is buried in the bottom of the ocean, and only about 1/3 sticking up. This is a picture of another jackup barge. This is a tower installation. You see the nacelle there. They're getting ready to put the 3 blades on. And there's a number of ways to put the blades on. This is one way to do it. You can also do rabbit ears, where you just have 2 blades and then you bring the 3rd blade up. And this is a picture of a farm in Denmark. So I think those are my photos I thought I would share with everybody before we answer questions. Thanks.
I imagine some of you have questions. Pass the microphone.
Hi, thanks a lot. What are the main reasons that these offshore wind farms are successful in Europe compared to here? Is it the regulatory and technical challenges are lower, or is it the incentives are higher, or just a combination of all 3?
Yeah.
I think basically it's the support of the structure, the support structure in place. For example, we never have an RPS here. So, for example, you know, they have something called ROCs, which is renewable obligation certificates that are tradable, and they have a value of somewhere around 40 pounds a rock. And for offshore machines, they get 2 rocks, so that's 80 pounds, besides what they get for the gray power, which is another 50. So it's about 130 pounds times $1.6 per pound, so you can calculate. So there is an existing financial support that makes these projects profitable currently, and these financial systems supporting this has been in place for a long period of time, which allows you to build an industry and allow that industry to continue to grow and prosper and make contribution towards reducing the cost of energy. What's happening in the United States here is that we have something called production tax credits that is only allowed for the wind energy to make the playing field level, because if you look at fossil fuel tax reductions, you know, you get fossil depletion allowances, you got tax, all these things related to the cost of fuel. It's not there in the wind industry, so we don't have a way of deducting the cost of wind resource, for example, as a tax deduction. So the Congress came up with a method to compensate wind to make the playing field level by giving something called production tax credits, which we get 1.5 to 2 cents a kilowatt hour as a tax credit towards somebody that has a tax liability. And that production tax credits stays up for a year or two, and then it expires, and then it comes back on and expires again. So as a result of that, there's no consistent policy. So it's nothing short of a miracle that we have an industry in the United States.
I've got a question here, please. It's probably the big, particularly here in the Southeast, the big challenge we have is called the hurricane season. What impact would a hurricane have, or how do you design around that with your systems?
I can take a shot at that. I think I've got that. Thanks. That was a question that we were very concerned about when we were looking at a demonstration project in Pamlico Sound. I think this still needs to be tested out over time, but generally the turbine manufacturers seem to think their machines can be designed to withstand Category 3 and Category 4 storms. They can build them. There's probably a cost associated with weatherizing them to withstand a storm of that size. I think there's also, there's always the potential that a storm could, the way the engineering is done, it's, you've put all these inputs into a model, and then, if that storm comes over the site and comes back over the turbines and hovers, I'm not sure you can model that. So, it's a challenge that's still out there. But from the preliminary discussions we had, the turbine manufacturers weren't all that concerned about it.
Question over here. Many, perhaps all of the renewable electricity standards in other states are promoted in terms of economic benefit to the state by growing the industry there. And also, as you've shown, wind energy, for example, depending on what you think about, but offshore wind energy is more expensive. So can you say something about the kind of balance of costs and benefits? More expensive energy, but more industrial development in the states. How does that, is it worth the cost?
Well, I think that's the question states are going to have to answer, and constituents are going to have to talk to their legislators about and determine whether they have the appetite for this industry. I think it does take a little bit of vision to think out and say we're going to accept these higher costs in the short term for job creation, for component manufacturers that come here. And we're not just talking the blades and the towers, but all of the smaller components that are found within the turbines. But it really is the question that, you know, anyone who gets asked it should probably throw it back on everyone else. And how much are you willing to pay for power? If we pay 8 or 9 cents in the Southeast, are people willing to pay twice that for clean, renewable energy? And I don't know that the question's been answered. I know it's a question that has to be continually asked as we continue to develop renewable energy resources in this country.
I would ask you to look into Iowa. It's a very good example of what you're talking about. In Iowa, in 2004, Clipper was just a startup. 2005, we had a prototype, and we looked for places to build a plant. And we had a lot of states come to us and, you know, gave us a lot of incentives, and Iowa was the most aggressive with incentives, and so that's why we located our first assembly plant in Iowa. Now look at Iowa. Iowa has 14% of its energy coming from wind, and they now have, I think, a total of 9 OEMs in Iowa. Clipper was the first one, then it was followed by Siemens. They have a blade facility, followed by a tower manufacturer, then Acciona, and you know, you can count 7 or 8 or 9 OEMs that are now in Iowa, and you can calculate, we have about 300-400 jobs there alone in our plant. Multiply that by 10. So you can imagine that there is a tremendous benefit to locating industry in these states. So they gain the benefit of clean energy. A lot of Iowa energy is coming from other states, so they have to import their fossil fuels. So now 14% of that is produced from their own local resource, and they create jobs.
Yeah, I'm interested in the configuration of the wind farms, and I wondered what you thought of the bio-inspired design of using the fish school arrangement so that you recapture the energy of the vortices that are shed by the wind turbines.
I'm going to let you handle that one.
I can claim this. I have seen the fish arrangement, and somebody has discussed it with me. But I tell you that I need to do a CFD. We need to do CFD on that concept to verify that this is really what it is intended to do. At the moment, I'm a little skeptical until we see the results.
Cool idea, though.
Yeah, it looks good. Yeah, especially if these claims of all that extra energy. Thank you, Sankar. You win again.
My question relates to the amount of offshore wind off Georgia's coast. It looked to me like the NREL study found that there was a good deal more offshore wind than the joint Georgia Power, Georgia Tech study had found. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that the most recent DOE report that came out looked at the total resource. They may have had more data than, and actually maybe Mary, maybe you could answer that.
When the Southern Company Georgia Tech study was done, even the NREL map that actually you saw in Nick's presentation was different than the one you saw in Amir's presentation, because they were looking at different heights. A 50-meter height was the first one that showed less, and back in 2007 when we produced our report, that was basically what people were looking at, more or less. Now we're looking at 90 meters because the towers offshore are going much higher now. They're going much taller, and you can capture more wind the higher you go. So the numbers have increased in the last few years, just because the technology is moving up to meet the resource.
Those are great presentations, thanks. I'm wondering if the industry is giving up on the higher elevation possibilities for wind farms in the southeast. You mentioned there's a law that bans high elevation turbines in North Carolina. I'd like to hear more about that. And I had heard that there were a number of rural electric co-ops in northern Georgia that were putting together proposals for small wind farms. I wonder if you've heard about that. And then finally, having visited the Altamont Pass wind failure, partly because it was built right in the midst of the bird migratory flyways, have we got really good data now on where the birds, how the birds migrate? And do you, I suppose that project planners must overlay that on this wind resource and this great new word about the, what was that new word I learned? The depth of the, what was that? What was that word?
Bathymetry.
What was it?
Bathymetry.
Bathymetry, yes, along with the bathymetry stats.
We can divide and conquer here. So I think you start with the resource, and I'll probably respond.
Okay. Well, in North Carolina, I think it was in 1978 or 79, someone built a 10-story building on top of, I think it's Sugar Mountain. And as a result of that, the legislature put together a law that banned construction of any buildings on top of mountains. And it actually added an exemption for wind turbines, but that exemption has been interpreted as one turbine exemption, not multiple turbines. So because of that law and because of the interpretation of that law by the Attorney General, folks are really not looking at wind up in the mountains of North Carolina that I know of. So, and then I wouldn't be surprised if, you do hear that folks are still looking at coastal wind in North Carolina, right along the coast, not offshore. And I wouldn't be surprised if folks are likewise looking at it in northern Georgia. And it's really, from a developer's perspective, we have shareholders that we're accountable towards. We have returns that we have to hit. And that means we have to go where the strongest wind resource is and where we can develop projects to hit those returns and make our shareholders happy. So it's not that it can't be done, but if you have regulatory blockades or the wind resource isn't as good as it is somewhere else, then you're likely to have developers focus on the stronger resource, and that's what's happening generally.
I can speak a little bit to the Georgia. There is a Mountain Protection Act in Georgia. It's an ordinance. Currently, actually, Georgia Tech is working with others with the Georgia Wind Working Group to develop a template for a model wind ordinance for the state of Georgia for land-based wind. It should be out within a month or so. And there is we have to look at different zoning areas, in the state and what those local ordinances are, and then people can develop around those. So nobody is trying to stop them in Georgia. There isn't a specific law. There are various ordinances and acts that are in place in the state that may impede progress, but they're not a huge hurdle.
On the bird issue, I think the Altamont was a very unfortunate location for wind turbines. I think what they're trying to do now is make sure that some turbines are being decommissioned and moved out, and there's repowering that's going on where the smaller, fast-moving turbines are being replaced by larger turbines. But it's one that, in retrospect, should not have been placed there. As a result of that, I think to get a permit on a wind plant, you're required to have a study on the impact of birds and impact on bats. There are some bat cooperative research now that's being done where they're studying the habits of bats and how to work around. And some projects that are closer to bat population now are adjusting. They found out that they only forage when there is little wind and a lot of insects, and when the wind is high. So now they're adjusting the operation of the turbines where the cut-in speed is moved up a little bit, so they don't operate when they're foraging. So the industry, we're very, the wind industry is very aware that it's an environmental industry and we cannot be causing environmental damage. It's very important.
If I could, a question from one of our webcast listeners. Let me paraphrase this. It looks like the industry is very capital intensive. Where do you see opportunities for entrepreneurs?
Well, I mean, I think there, this is the offshore wind industry is a nascent industry. There are a couple of thousand megawatts of planned projects, but it is wide open. There's lots of room for innovation from how you promote these and interface with the public, all the way to the engineering side that Amir could really speak to better than I could. But it is a wide open industry, and the question is, will it really get launched in the United States in the next couple of years, and what's the next decade going to look like? And decisions we're making now are really going to shape that trajectory. So I think there's room for entrepreneurs in probably working with larger companies, potentially coming up with ways to reduce costs. Those are going to be some of the ways that entrepreneurs can help.
Just to add a small point to your point here, Clipper is a very good example for entrepreneurship, because when Clipper was formed in 2001, I think about the same time, 2002, GE acquired Zond, Enron Wind, and became GE Wind. A year afterwards or something, Siemens acquired a company called Bonus in Germany, and it became Siemens Windpower. And I talk to our chairman often and say, how could Clipper, that just a startup company with 10, 15 engineers, compete with these big guys, with thousands of engineers and deep pockets? And the fact that I'm still talking to you here is a proof that entrepreneurship and good ideas can still survive in this very competitive world. So.
I'd like to add something to who's ever on the webinar. Right now, the regulatory process for offshore wind is about 7 to 10 years long, and this is something developers are very, very concerned with. So any kind of databases, modeling, things that can help speed up things along that process, particularly in regard to siting. So if there's technology around marine spatial planning, if there's technology that can shorten those time frames, at least in the near term, those are areas that are sorely needed, that we need things developed in that arena.
Let's have 2 more questions. We started late, so we're going to end about 2 minutes, about 1:40. So 2 more questions.
Building up on the 10-year time frame, when do you see a federal RES passed in the Congress? And if it does pass, when do you see a commercial offshore wind farm in the Southeast?
I'm not certain an RES is going to pass. I don't have a lot of confidence that it's going to pass. It certainly could, and I think that it will help incrementally, but I'm not sure it's going to provide the long-term sustainable demand that everyone thinks it's going to. It's a pretty modest target, and it certainly helps in the near term, in the next couple of years, but I'm not confident that an RES is going to get passed this year. And then to your question about a commercial scale farm in the Southeast, I think it could happen in the next 10 years. I think if a state were willing to step out and take the lead and create the demand, either through a carve out or some other way to really say, we want to do this, we want to create jobs. I think that those are sort of the elements that are necessary to get to commercial scale offshore wind in the Southeast. And it's anyone's guess as to who's going to do it, but I do think it's possible in the next 10 years.
Here's the last question. How is Duke meeting the North Carolina Renewable Portfolio Standard? Are they doing that with projects they're building in other parts of the United States, or how are they doing that?
Duke Energy is, I'm somewhat familiar with their compliance strategy, but they are, the North Carolina RPS is a 3% standard by 2012. So they are meeting a portion of that requirement with out-of-state RECs, relatively low-cost renewable energy certificates. They're like rocks. They represent the environmental attributes of clean energy. And about 25%, I think, is coming from wind RECs from Texas.
What's the cost of a REC?
Right now, it's pretty low, but it's been, I mean, I think Texas wind RECs are $1 or $2. They're higher in other parts of the country. Duke is also buying power and RECs from landfill gas facilities. They have a rooftop solar program where they're building about 14 megawatts of solar on rooftops, customer rooftops, and then selling that back to the grid. There are also efforts to figure out how to turn poultry waste and swine waste into energy. And I think the utility just announced a project, a joint project with the Duke University to look at hog waste methane capture.
Doesn't the standard also qualify combined heat and power projects?
It does.
So it's much more expansive than it's typically being debated for national standards.
And then the last piece is energy efficiency. Energy efficiency can be 25% of the North Carolina standard, and we have been pretty aggressive in coming up with a new regulatory model to incentivize utilities to reduce their load, essentially. And we have, right now our load is directly linked with our revenues, so we've been working really creatively to try and figure out ways to incentivize us to basically reduce our load. And that's an important part of our compliance, and that's called Save a Watt. So, thanks.
If I just make a comment, not on this question, the previous question about the RPS. I think it's the representatives from the Southeast that have been opposing the cap and trade and the RES because they feel like we don't have the wind resource, we didn't have the solar resource as much as others. We may have biomass, we may have solar, but we didn't have wind. So I think it's very important that people in the Southeast that are enlightened, that know that these resources are available, talk to their representatives and senators and congressmen and say, we actually, this would be a very good thing for the Southeast, besides the rest of the country.
A couple of things. First, let's thank our great speakers. Thank you so much. Second is their presentations will be on the website, secleanenergy.org, so feel free to go to the website, and also archived version of this webcast will be on the website. And last but not least, the next program will be October 27th, Wednesday, October 27th, same time. So check the website because we might be moving to a different location. Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.